Today we will be talking about Romanticism. The first thing we need to do is define what Romanticism is. The Romanticism movement started in the late 18th century. It changed both the literary and artistic fields to focus more on inspiration, subjectivity, and the primacy of the individual. In this presentation, we will go over how Romanticism affected all of these areas. We will start with discussing the major things of Romanticism and go more in detail into what they mean. Then, we will discuss how Romanticism affected the music industry through Ludwig van Beethoven and the way he led change in music. Next, we will discuss how Romanticism affected the arts through David Friedrich and the major themes he portrays in his paintings. Finally, we will discuss how Romanticism affected literature through studying Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Herman Melville. After discussing all of these, we will study how Romanticism differed from the Enlightenment.
Moving on to our three themes of Romanticism, our first being inspiration. The Romantics truly believed that the art piece had to be inspired by a certain thing or event in order to actually be genuine, and they really hoped to capture that moment of inspiration in their artwork. Our second theme being subjectivity. The poet really gives his free expression to his thoughts, his experiences, his ideas, feelings, and emotions, and does not care for rules nor regulations. Our third theme being primacy of the individual. We will touch base on this in our Nathaniel Hawthorne slide, going over the Scarlet Letter and how this theme is relevant.
Ludwig van Beethoven was a prime example of how Romanticism affected the musical industry. He used dramatic contrast in his pieces with chromatic harmonies and discords. He used his style because of the difficult times in his life. The dramatic contrast shows how he was always in pain. This shows the romantic theme of inspiration because he used the feelings from his life to create the pieces. This led to his pieces being called passionate and expressive, which showed the subjectivity of his pieces and was an important part of the movement. Finally, during his life, Beethoven claimed to be equal to kings, showing the importance Romantics put into themselves and the primacy of the individual. These points were shown in his song Fürlis. His quick transition showed inspiration from his life, which led to the subjectivity he was praised for. He was also claimed to be able to play any part of the song better than the orchestra could, showing his belief in the primacy of the individual. Beethoven's pieces are still relevant today because they show us how passionate music can be, and he is one of the people credited with making that change happen.
Friedrich, being a very large contributor in the Romantic period, focused more on the element of mystery and emptiness. And if you look at the picture we have on this slide, you could see he's looking into nothingness practically, or looking into we see with the clouds. It's very mysterious in a way.
Edgar Allan Poe showed how Romanticism affected literature. Poe saw that most writing was used to teach people a lesson, and thought that it could be expanded into showing passion instead. Poe made his characters focus more on their feelings and intuition than thinking, because he felt that people would be able to better relate to it and gain a deeper understanding of his intentions with the pieces. This shows the subjectivity of the Romantic period because he was opening up a very dictated use of writing into an emotional field that many people could contribute and relate to. Poe also wrote his stories in odd places people would have to imagine instead of knowing immediately. This allowed for him to use his inspiration more directly, as people had to follow his experiences instead of what they thought it should be like. This lets him use the conventions he wanted and made it true to how he thought it should come across. Finally, Poe focused on one character's thoughts in his pieces. This led to primacy of the individual because it only impacted one individual instead of many complex relationships. A good example of this is The Raven. The Raven was inspired by Poe's thoughts of loss, showing the theme of inspiration. It showed one character's experience with grief, showing the primacy of the individual. Finally, it showed the descent of a crazy man, so Poe could use his thoughts on grief and how bad it is, showing subjectivity. Poe is still relevant today because of its insistence on art being used outside of teaching lessons. This is very relevant today, and without Poe, would have taken much longer to come about.
And continuing on with Hawthorne's theme of the primacy of the self, nowadays we tend to care more about helping others and forget every once in a while to check in with ourselves and make sure that we're doing okay and that we can also thrive.
Herman Melville is the final example of how Romanticism affected literature. His views on society were heavily influenced by his time in the Tipi tribe as a child. This portrays inspiration and shaped his ability to critique society in his writing. Melville thought that people should break away from society and the power issues that come with it. This is an example both of subjectivity because he introduces many alternatives in his writing, and primacy of the individual because he promoted the ideas that people don't need society to thrive, as people believed during his time. An excellent example of this is the book Moby Dick. Moby Dick focused on one person's quest to overcome the darkness inside of himself. This showed the primacy of the individual because it was one person's struggle. He contrasted the social class ideologies of different characters in the book, allowing people to be subjective in which they think is best. Finally, he used it as a way to express the teachings he found vital with his life, showing inspiration. We should study Melville today because he made the idea of questioning and correcting society prevalent, which has become very relevant today with activism, including the Black Lives Matter protests.
Now moving on to our last slide, Romanticism versus the Enlightenment period. The Enlightenment had sort of an emphasis on rules and how one must abide by these set of rules, while our theme of subjectivity in Romanticism says that the Romantics didn't care for rules nor the regulations and chose to be unique in that way and choose their own route.